Joak Gusno and Justa. Anadaga he no not nangre. Hadino Shone not nangre. Joak Gusno and Justa. Anadaga he no not nangre. Hadino Shone not nangre. I said, my name is Joak Gusno. I come from Onondaga, the Onondaga Nation, the Haudenosaunee. Tahune, not nangre. I'm a wolf. That's my family. My family is a wolf, and I'm a faith keeper for the Turtle Clan, the Onondaga Council of Chiefs, which is the central fire of the Haudenosaunee Six Nation Iroquois Confederacy. Okay, my English name is Ejfa40 Lyons, and I still reside on the Onondaga Nation all my life. Turned 90 last March, and observed a spectrum of time I have behind me. So I've seen a lot of changes from when I was a young person. From horse and wagon to what you see today. Thomas Banyaka, the elder of the Hopi Nation, he was one of 4 messengers that was given this particular message to carry. And finally, he was the last one surviving. And I accompanied Thomas on many trips, many places, and he had a depiction of the writing on a rock, Hopi land, and that was the prophecy. And basically, what it said was there were two paths, 2 roads. The bottom road was the traditional Hopi Nation, traditional Native people, and it was a road of peace. And above it, another depiction, another path. He said that was the path of our brother from across the seas. And in that depiction, there were several elements that were, he said, were first the First World War and the Second World War. And then the path moves and kind of moves up in towards the sky and just disappears. On the bottom part of the depiction, the path goes straight on, and there's depictions of corn, things growing. So he said that the prophecy was that the brother would meet a crisis, and that crisis there would be a failure on the part of our brothers from across the water. And we had options to follow the lower path of peace or our brother's path. And it was a warning. And these 4 men were assigned to carry that warning in the 4 directions so that people could be alerted. And many places and many times I've heard Thomas present that. One of the last places was at the United Nations. We finally were able to breach the enclave of nations there and we talked to a very high-level person at the UN. And Thomas talked about the House of Micah. And that's what he perceived the UN to be, the House of Micah. And in the House of Micah were world leaders. And these world leaders were who he wanted to talk to. And that was his mission. So sometimes early 70s, we breached the UN. And we talked to a very high official, maybe second or third in command. And Thomas presented the story, the depiction, complete his mission. And he was in his 80s. He was in his late 80s at the time. Very energetic, and you wouldn't think he was that old. But his mission carried him the four corners of the earth, and we were invited by James Parks Morton. He was the Reverend of St. John the Divine, and he was the one that invited us to this meeting in 1988. It was held in England. And we went and we presented our position. There were an extraordinary group of people there. And, I think that the Dalai Lama was there, and Mother Teresa was there. Also, Senator Al Gore at the time, and the director, executive director, was Japanese, and he was very, very capable, extraordinary person. A lot of contacts around the world when he was presiding. And we were part of this great gathering. And of course, it was the Indigenous voice, which was lacking prior to that. My observation has been that there's always been a barrier between the Indigenous people and the rest of the world. Sometimes it's a political barrier. Most of the time it's a political barrier. Sometimes it's more direct. But basically, I would say Indigenous people in the politics of the world are persona non grata. We're a problem to everybody. We're a serious problem. And probably the main problem is that as long as we're here in this Turtle Island, which is the name of North America for us, we call it Turtle Island. You know, our brothers from across the water have only been here 5 days. And in those 5 days, it's amazing what has occurred here. We can translate a day from a day to a year or to 100 years, because we've been here a long time. So when I say 5 days, I'm talking about the 500 years from the landfall of Columbus. And with that landfall of Columbus started an amazing change in the lives of all of the indigenous people in the Western Hemisphere. Heretofore unknown, unexplored. And everything started out as a mistake from our perspective. First of all, Columbus thought he had landed in India, so suddenly we were Indians. That was the first mistake. And then, of course, the second mistake was they named our continent America after a man who was exploring, Amerigo Vespucci, who was Italian. So starting right out to date, we have an Italian name and a name from India. And it continued that way all this time. And so the colonization of North America, let's say, was serious business. And I would say that Queen Isabella of Spain, who sponsored the trip, was part of the hegemony of our Christian doctrine. Christianity was moving around the world as a doctrine. And probably at the time of the landfall, 1492, very, very serious times in Europe. The Inquisition was in full swing. And the Pope, who was in charge at the time, Alexander VI, casually announced that if there are, it was a papal bull, actually it was a bull. He said, if there are no Christian nations in this new lands that you have discovered, I declare those lands to be empty, terra nullius. Further, if there are people there and they are not Christians, they do not have a right of title to land. They have only the right of occupancy. This was issued from Europe. It was a vast, breathtaking statement encapsulating the whole Western Hemisphere. Amazing. Of course, all of our people here had no idea that this had happened and that we were no longer in charge of our land as far as Christian doctrine was concerned. And that statement from Alexander VI is called the doctrine of discovery. And with that statement, he relegated indigenous people to kind of a lower position in humanity. It was neither real people, neither equal to them. In the middle, we were suspended. And we were there we finally, after years and years of struggle, got a statement out of the United Nations in 2007, recognizing the statement was a declaration, recognizing the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and that peoples had an S on it, which meant that you were talking specifically about Arapahoes and Cheyennes and all of the Native nations in North, Central, and South America. 2007, from 1492. And in that time, during all that time, our people were persecuted and prosecuted. They were killed. and a huge cleansing, I would say, from the perspective of Christianity, purging of the native peoples in North, Central, and South America. Millions of people killed, hunted down with dogs. Early on, it was fierce. This Christian doctrine was fierce. They would annihilate a village. It was a hegemony, with capital H. And we were always a problem. And we are still a problem. And we're like a conscience. And they've been trying to still that conscience all this time. But we're still here. When I started out and they asked me to take that position on the Council of Chiefs, grandmother, I said, no, we're not qualified to take that position. First of all, I wasn't fluent in the language. But basically, I was, I would say untutored in the real history. I grew up on a nation. I grew up down in our nation. And we were kind of an enclave. We were kind of sequestered. And I remember seeing my first white man. I was about 4 years old, and it was the first time we ever seen a white man. And we were playing alongside the road. We had a little gang. And here comes a wagon, a horse and wagon. And there was a man sitting in the wagon. He was all dressed in black. He had a big black hat on, a big beard, gray beard. And we were hiding in the weeds watching him go by. He never saw us. But we were really, he was fearful looking to us. He scared us. But he was a rag man. And what he would do is he would sell rags and so forth and come through the reservation. And we had plenty of rags. That's about where we were. So the nation itself, I grew up in, was really a strong community. And I realize today how fortunate I was to grow up in that enclave where children were valued, and we could go into any house, anytime, anywhere, and we'd get patted on the head and get something to eat. And first question was, who's your mother? Who's your father? And, oh, you're one of those blind boys, and so forth. And everywhere we went, we were valued. The elders all liked us. It was a great community. On the standards of our brothers from across the water, we were very poor. On our own standards, no, we really had an amazing community. Grandmothers. And the philosophy of our people is that all men are uncles to all children, no matter what color they are. And all women are aunties and mothers to all children, no matter what color they are. All children, very inclusive term. And that's how you were treated. It was amazing. Everybody shared. We never had a lot to eat, My father was a good hunter, and we lived according to his shotgun. And I grew up, he taught me, and I was a very good hunter, excellent hunter. And growing up in the early 40s during the war years, ammunition, shotgun shells, or bullets were hard to come by because all of that was going overseas in a major war. So luckily I had a friend, a young man working in a sporting goods store. Name was Edwin Irwin, fiery redhead. And he and I were friends. And he would slip me a handful of shotgun shells, 4 or 5 shells. So those 4 or 5 shells were going to be 4 or 5 something to eat. We couldn't afford to miss in those years. So I went out with my father learning how to hunt. I would be the dog. I would be running in the bushes, chasing out the rabbits and the pheasants or whatever, and then tracking. And when he finally gave me a shotgun, 1 shell, he said, "If you miss, you go home." And that's how I learned to hunt, 1 shell. And when I see these so-called hunters today with these machine guns, and they call themselves sportsmen, I mean, the deer and the animals are defenseless, and they have these automatic weapons to hunt. It's a crime, I would say. It's criminal against those defenseless animals. Amazing to me how things have transpired. Early on, I grew up, hunting with non-Indian people. They were decent hunters. They weren't like today. Things have changed so drastically. Well, I found people of like mind. Basically, it's when I said, well, hey, I mean, well, like I said, I found people of like mind that were trying to find a way of peace. And peace is the foundational word for our nation, the Haudenosaunee. Scano, peace. First principle of our confederation. Second principle was equity for the people. Everything to be treated fairly, everybody equally. And the third principle was the union, confederation of the 5 original nations, and Tuscarora coming in 1711, making 6 nations. But we had a union, probably one of the first in the world, actually, but it was based on peace, equity, and the power of the good minds. So I would say embrace the temple of understanding. What I saw was opened up like a whole other room full of like-minded people. We're reaching the end of our tenure here on this earth, but my concern has always been for the future, for coming generations. It was our instruction. So, yes, when I first met this enclave of most amazing people sitting on the dais, astonishing to me. It was Mother Teresa. She was a good woman, kind, and very determined, very kind. It was quite an array of leaders there. we knew about the League of Nations in 1924, 1923. One of our leaders, Cayuga chief by the name of Discahe, went to Geneva, and he wanted to lay charges against Canada for deposing the leadership of the traditional leaders of the Haudenosaunee, where Royal Mounted Police of Canada came in and literally, physically removed the chiefs from the council and replaced them with what I would call puppet leaders, native leaders, but they were not traditional. And this guy went to Geneva. He heard about the League of Nations, and he was going to lay charges, and he never did. They wouldn't allow him to speak. England and Canada made sure that he couldn't address the League of Nations. But the mayor of Geneva heard about that, and he said, "You can bring." He said, "We have a large forum here, and I will offer that to you to bring your message." And so this guy was able to deliver the message, not at the League of Nations, but at a huge forum in Geneva in 1923, where he challenged the activities of the federal government of Canada, physically by force, removing leaders of the Haudenosaunee Iroquois Confederacy. He was well received, and he laid the course for us to move into the international arena. So we decided during the 60s, there was a lot of activities. Native people were moving and organizing and challenging the restrictions that had been placed on them, and I was part of that. Young man at the time, and I would say a runner. My brother Lee and I were just a year apart, so we're almost like twins. And Lee was tremendously effective in whatever he did. He could do almost anything. So we were a team, and so we decided that, look, we're getting nowhere here. Indians going to Washington, D.C., making complaints against the people that were causing the problem. We said, what we have to do is we got the International Forum. So we began that discussion in 1971. And finally, in 77, we were organized well enough. Take probably about 148 delegates from North, Central, and South America to Geneva. It took a heck of a lot of work, and we had support from very few people financially. As I say, we've always been on the outside. We've always been a challenge. First of all, I would say that what really needs to happen almost immediately is that the power structure currently in charge of the world, which is basically corporations, have to change their direction, because they're the ones that are really driving force in the world today. And they're a good example of the problem they are is that right now in Texas and so forth, you have fracking, what they call fracking. And we were told that, and science says very clearly that fossil fuel is what's causing global warming, and you have to change your energy. Well, they have no idea about changing energy. They're building pipelines to move fossil fuel in the face of, I would say, 10 years to the point of no return here. We're a tipping point in the whole structure of the system that we live in will tip negatively, and there'll be no way that you're going to regain that. It's just downhill after that. And this is facing us right at this point, and the leadership in charge of the world right now is going in the opposite direction. So you say, what would you suggest? I suggest to change the direction immediately, and leaving fossil fuel in the ground and using the wind, the sun, and the waters, the natural powers of the world to energize, use the energy for survival. That's number one. If you don't do that, you continue to use fossil fuel, you're destroying the future of your own children, grandchildren, 7th generation. So that would be number one, change direction immediately. We don't have a lot of time. In 2000, the year 2000, I gave a speech at the UN. And I said, on behalf of the indigenous people I was speaking for, coming from the north, I said, the ice is melting. The ice is melting in the north. And change is here. You have to change your direction. That was 2000. Eventually, during that time, I was asked to repeat the whole speech again at the end of the same event. It's the only time I've ever been asked to do the same speech twice. But the speech was, the ice is melting. We can do something about that. That was 20 years ago. And then I was asked to address the General Assembly at the UN 2014. I was writing a speech, and I said, I don't need to write a speech. I said, I just give the same speech I gave 2000. And I did. And all the people sitting there in this huge forum were all wisely shaking their head, agreeing with what I said. And at the end, I said, I gave the same speech 14 years ago. You haven't done anything. In fact, it's worse. And so change the direction. That's almost immediate. And of course, the pandemic that we're facing right now is just the beginning of this final, I would say, our last chance for survival as a species. I mean, I'm listening to some leaders talking about how they're going to be doing things 20 years from now, and I'm not sure just what condition this earth is going to be in 20 years from now. Certainly, this current administration is going in the opposite direction. And the fact that people are supporting it is a very serious indication of the lack of comprehension on the part of humanity, just how dangerous we are, situation we're in now. And I think your efforts here to try to get that word out is fundamentally important. And the first thing that I would say just get off the fossil fuel immediately and begin. They have the technology to change, but they're sitting on it because they want to make the last bit of money on oil. our people were told in the beginning of the Confederacy by the peacemaker who brought our Confederacy together based on peace. And his instructions to the leaders and to the people who were now gathered finally on the shores of Onondaga Lake here, upstate New York is where that took place. And maybe 1,600 years ago. Who knows, long ago. Anyway, he said to the assembly, he said, when you sit and counsel for the welfare of the people, think not of yourself, nor of your family, nor even your generation. He said, make your decisions on behalf of the coming generations, those faces looking up from the earth, awaiting their time, layer upon layer. Make your decisions on behalf of those coming generations, he said, unto the seventh generation. That was our instruction. It's valid then, it's valid today. And as I look to that seventh generation, because 7 generations ago, somebody was looking out for me, or else I wouldn't be here. So 7 generations hence, it's pretty murky out there. It's hard to see 7 generations. So I say we're at that point now, and probably last chance. You either do it or you don't. And it's going to require a reversal of the direction of the world today. We can do it. I mean, something's happening in the country today that's extraordinary. In the face of the pandemic, we stripped the mask away from a lot of people. And so we'll make the best of it. And the peacemaker instructed the leaders, he said to us, never take hope from the people. So I think one of the philosophers of this era that I depend on every now and then, I just think there's a great philosopher, great perspective. That was Yogi Berra, the catcher for the New York Yankees for years. He had great sayings. And the one that I would say that we want to pay attention to right now, he said, it ain't over till it's over. So the fight is on. I'm in it 100%.